Right now what we have in our application is category and application type. But now what we want to add is product. So what will happen is product will have a category and an application type. So here we will have a foreign key relation for category as well as application inside our product model. First we'll focus on category. So let me switch back to our application, and what we'll do is we'll start adding the product model. So we'll go to Solution Explorer and we have our models folder. We'll right click, add a new class, and we'll call this product.cs. In this class we want all of the product related properties. First is a primary key and we'll just call it ID. We will also add the data annotation for key. Next with product we'll have name, description, and we'll have a price of the product. So let me add those 4 properties. Now along with name, description, and price, I also want an image for the product. So for image what I will do is I will save the image on the actual server, but I will just have a path that I will save in the database. So string, I'll call this image here. Then we can add few data annotations here like required for name and price. We can add a range here and we can say minimum price will be $1 and max will just make it int.max value. Next thing that we have to configure is the foreign key relation to category ID. So for that what we'll do is we want a property here which is public virtual, and this will be of the type category, and we'll call this category. We will have the getter and setter. With this, EF code automatically adds a mapping between product and category. It will also create a category ID column which will be the foreign key relation between both the tables. But that category ID column is not visible. So if you want, you can also explicitly add the mapping entity. So we'll do prop here, we'll call this integer, and let me call this category ID. Now this column that you have added will be a mapping entity between the category and product, but EF Core is not aware of that. So to make it aware, we have to add the foreign key data annotation, which is inside data annotations.schema, and then we have to define the name of the property or the mapping entity, which is category ID. So this foreign key attribute you will add on the category object. And then with the category ID, we can add a display property and we can say name is equal to, let's call this category type. So with this, let's add a migration and see what actually happens. Before that, I also want to point out one thing. Now when we have to add this to migration, we will have to add that to application DB context. But before we do that, let me add a migration and let me show you what happens if we add one. So we'll go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Console, and we'll call this Add Migration. I know what's going to happen here, so I'll name it accordingly. But let's actually examine on what actually happens, and then I will explain you why this happened. I'm calling the migration Add Required Fields. Now, if you remember, we did not change anything in the DB context after we added the application type. But here you see there are some alter column commands. It is altering the column name in both of the table, and the thing that it is altering is nullable. It is making nullable false for both of them, and you can see old nullable was true. So what actually happened? After we added the category as well as application type, if you remember, what we did was inside category, we added the required property on name, and we also added a required property on name in application type. If you go to category, here we have this display name and range annotations. These annotations are only for UI purposes or validations. But required and few more data annotations actually are for EF Core to alter the database. When you add a required property, what it does is it makes the column not nullable. So it has to make some database change. And when it has to make a database change, it will add a migration. So if ever you make any change to the database, be sure to add a migration and push it to the database. That being said, we'll add a new migration with the product added in our DB context, and then we can push both the migrations together to the database. Let's do that in the next video.